LC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Van Tassel, or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here. Hi, everyone. Stephen Van Tassel here, wildlife control consultant, bringing another episode of Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to our channel, ring the bell, and of course, if you can give us a 5-star review, that would be most appreciated. You need to get a hold of me. You can reach me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Love to hear from you, comments about the show, perhaps suggestions for new shows. And yes, of course, even if you have a criticism of the show as well, we'll take that as well. You can also join us on Facebook with the Pest Geek Podcast Facebook family. Join us, join the revolution, as Franklin calls it. And so we'd love to have you on board there, where you can ask questions and talk about your wins and losses and other questions you may have about wildlife control. Well, we're going to keep things relatively brief here today because I have a special guest, Lacy. She is the North American Director of the Eastern Flyway Project. You say Eastern Flyway Project, what is I referring to? She is part of the International Crane Foundation. So we're really going to get geeky on you here today. We're going to be talking about Sandhill cranes, and their populations, of course, are growing across most of the country, and certainly that she would argue they're probably not growing fast enough, but we'll let her talk more about that. So obviously when populations are growing, conflicts emerge, and so she has some expertise in this area, because when we're dealing with a federally protected bird, obviously there's going to be some concerns about how do we do that legally and effectively, and so she'll have some resources. So we're really glad to have you on board today. The website, if you want to go visit it, it's called savingcranes.org. That's savingcranes.org, and they are in Baraboo, Wisconsin. So that's what a name that is. But I had an opportunity to visit their site. It is quite a place to go. So if you need to go visit some place out north of Madison, I believe you're north of Madison, right?
Absolutely. Right. We're right near Wisconsin Dells, the water park capital
without
of
a
the
doubt.
world.
So it was quite a tour up there to be able to see some cranes, and I'll let her get started. Well, welcome to the show, Miss Lacy. We're glad to have you here. What got you started in the area of cranes, restoration and protection and all that?
Yeah, I was interested in birds. That was it. So I was in graduate school. My concentration was conservation biology. And I just wanted to do field work, because even through my master's work, I was analyzing other people's data, and it was songbird data. I was up in Duluth, Minnesota. Mm-hmm. And so I just needed to do field work. That was just what I needed to do. Yeah. And found an internship here at the International Crane Foundation. I'm like, field work, cranes are birds. I did not know anything about them before I started. Okay. And that was in 2000. And I focused on the problem of cranes and crop damage. That's what we were focusing on back in 2000. So we have been working on this for a long time, and we're still working on it. I have since added whooping cranes, because we have whooping cranes in the Eastern Flyway of the United States now. So I kind of split my time, and we do restorations of our beautiful prairies here. So we are restoring to oak savanna, which should be what we would have found post-glacial on this part of North America in the Great Lakes region. Great. And it's
so we beautiful. So help our audience understand. So how does the group of cranes differ from herons or something? So that's obviously a category of birds, a group of birds. What makes them different? How do we differentiate? How do we know that's a crane versus that's a heron?
That's a heron. That's a good one, because they look so similar, but the families are actually fairly distinct. Okay. So the closest living relative to cranes is a limpkin, which is found down in the Everglades in Florida. Right. So herons, egrets, those are large-bodied wading birds. So that's the similarity. But when they fly, they will tuck their head back into that position that people recognize, and they fly in a different formation. Okay. But when you see a crane cannot bend its neck in that kind of S shape. So you will always see the crane with its head out and its legs out. Okay. The herons and egrets tend to be very, very wetland centric. So they nest in trees, which sandhill and whooping cranes cannot do. They don't have a hind toe, so you'll never see a crane in a tree purposefully.
Okay.
They nest on the ground. And herons and egrets tend to be piscivores, so they will. I have gotten calls. You will be interested to know they know that herons are not cranes, but they have problems with herons getting into their fish ponds.
Yes, yeah, they enjoy the food.
That's a tough one because I said, you can try all sorts of exclusion devices, but I said maybe just buy some cheap goldfish and enjoy the show. I thought that would be fun, personally, being a bird lover. I don't know that they appreciated that.
Yeah, they probably didn't. No, I would think that a better way would either be some netting, or I suggest that people put in larger rocks that give the fish a place to hide.
Something for the fish to hide in. Yeah. Either or.
Okay. All right. Well, that's great information, because I was wondering, how do I differentiate a crane from a heron? So how many cranes worldwide are there?
There are 15 species worldwide. They occur in 5 continents. And most people can guess one continent that they do not occur on.
Right. The Antarctica.
Antarctica. Yep. Right. And they have not made it to South America. That is the other continent that has no.
Really? Interesting. That's a little surprising.
Yeah, given other bird species that are there, but for whatever reason, how they moved historically, that they have not made it there.
Oh, so fascinating. Okay.
We only have 2 species that are in North America. One happens to be the rarest of the 15 species. That's the whooping crane. And they occur in several populations now, 3, 2 reintroduced, 1 natural.
Okay.
And the other happens to be the most numerous crane species in the world, and that's the sandhill crane.
Sandhill crane, okay.
And sandhill cranes have 6 subspecies, 3 migratory, 3 non-migratory. Okay. Mississippi, Florida, and Cuba have non-migratory sandhill populations.
Is that natural non-migratory, or is interesting, really?
Yeah. Okay. Why should I expend all that energy? I love it here on the coast. I'll just stay.
That's right. Yeah, fascinating.
Yep.
So clearly, were sandhill cranes ever as reduced as far as the whooping crane were during the Great, before they were protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act?
Right. They were not. And it's hard to know exactly how many, but Aldo Leopold, who, as a matter of fact, is famously the shack, the Leopold Foundation, and his shack is right down the road from us here on the Wisconsin River. And so he wrote an elegy to sandhill cranes, a marshland elegy, and he thought that he was going to see cranes go extinct in Wisconsin in his lifetime. And one of his graduate students, that was his project, is to do a survey of cranes here breeding in the upper Midwest. And he estimated 25 pairs in Wisconsin, maybe Wisconsin and the UP. There were probably some more in Michigan. But so not quite as few as whooping cranes, but dangerously close to being extirpated from this area as well.
And were that hunting, then of course changes to the landscape, probably both those things occurred at the same time?
Okay. That market hunting, that the same thing that decimated the passenger pigeon. Yeah. So it was more market and subsistence hunting. Okay. Unregulated hunting.
Unregulated hunting.
And so it was that leading to the Lacy Act, no relation.
Right.
Which became the Migratory Bird Act. And Wisconsin also has about 50% of its historic wetlands. And there was areas like that during the Great Depression, people who were trying to homestead in Wisconsin literally walked away from their farms. And it was areas that are now Necedah National Wildlife Refuge, Horicon, and other areas where people walked away because it was wasteland. It was mucky, marshy. Ugh. Well, it turns out that it is really, really good for cranes. And so that was kind of a core breeding area where they've been expanding out. And the population is still expanding eastwards from here. Okay. So New England and the Eastern Canadian provinces are still increasing their populations.
So in terms of, how many flyways are there for the cranes right now? You're in charge of the Eastern Flyway, which I'm assuming goes along coastline in New England and all the eastern seaboard stuff?
Eastern Flyway is our word for it, because that's not a management area according to Fish and Wildlife Service. So
all right.
What we call Eastern Flyway, birds that the core of the sandhill crane breeding area in this particular population, the eastern population of the greater subspecies of sandhill crane.
Okay.
So they breed Minnesota, mostly in Wisconsin and Michigan, and they kind of go to the north, to the southeast generally.
All right.
That's been changing. I can give you a link to a publication that talks about that.
Sure.
So they cross over from the Mississippi Flyway to the Atlantic Flyway.
Okay.
There are 5 other populations of managed populations of sandhill in North America of varying degrees. And we did a podcast of our own about that. We have we used to have a weekly webinar series. And so that was one that I did, talking about all of the sandhills of North America and where to find them and where to
I was
them.
from, before I moved to Montana, I did some time in Nebraska. And so Nebraska is famous for its sandhill. It's quite a tourist event because there's no hunting of sandhills allowed in Nebraska. So is that the eastern, or is that the western or central?
That is the name of that population is the mid-continent population.
Mid-continent, okay.
Yeah. So all 3 migratory subspecies, lesser, greater, and Canadian, which is right in the middle, occur in that population. And they go through in spectacular numbers through the Platte River Valley in central Nebraska. So
quite a sight. Yeah.
It is spectacular. And I cannot recommend going to Nebraska in March enough to people. It is worth seeing. Absolutely. They stage there for up to a month or more.
Yeah, it's amazing how loud it is too.
Yes.
So it's quite loud.
Love
so let's talk a little about because this is clearly a niche animal, but it's certainly something that more wildlife control operators are going to encounter as their numbers grow. And of course, as human population grows or takes up more land, or whatever these conflicts are going to occur. So talk a little about the life history of the sandhill crane in terms of, what's the process that they go through? I guess whether I don't know if there's a difference between migratory and non-migratory in terms of life history. Obviously, the ones that aren't migratory are
one big difference.
Migrating, but what are they doing in terms of their life? What's the timeline for them?
Yeah. So I'll speak in general about the migratory species and the eastern population that I know best.
Okay.
So they have the greater subspecies that's what we have here in the upper Midwest. That's what's in the Rocky Mountain and on the West Coast as well. So that's what you see there in Montana. They have a relatively shorter migration. So they will return here to Wisconsin even as early as late February, but typically early March. They are long-lived. So that is kind of one of the drivers. They are long-lived and highly territorial breeders. So up here, because we are probably at carrying capacity in the core breeding areas, there's a lot of competition for real estate. So they need to come back and make sure that they claim their territory, or somebody else might come in and try to usurp it.
Do they fight, or is it just simply bluff?
I would say 80% bluff. And if it comes to fisticuffs, that can be bad. So they have a beak, and people say, oh, you got to watch out for that beak. Herons, absolutely, because that is their method of, you've seen them fishing. Cranes, they can absolutely be dangerous with their beak, but you need to watch out for their feet. Their feet have those talons on them. And so they do what we call a jump rake. And then they jump up into the air with their feet up, and they will come down, and they can eviscerate.
Ooh, they're that sharp.
Yeah, I've got a couple of scars.
Do you have an idea how far forward? So, because this is a safety issue, all right, everyone, you may not. We're going to get a little. How far forward? If I'm approaching a sandhill crane, which is just hard for me to believe, given that they're so flighty around people. But if I got close enough, how far forward can they jump?
It's more an up and then reach out. So I would give them 3 feet.
3 feet. Okay.
3 feet. This is so the non-migratory population in Central Florida. I think that this would be very good knowledge for folks in Florida. We get a lot of calls from cranes that are doing damage to lawns, to window screens, that kind of thing. So we're getting away from, we'll get back to their life cycle, but this is an important point, because when we create these subdivisions and basically, you know, our human dominated landscape around these long-lived territorial species, they stay and they get used to us. And so that is one reason why landowners will have their particular pair of birds.
Okay.
And they even name them. George and Gracie are very popular names.
Okay.
So
are they dangerous to pets?
They can be. So it's this kind of familiarity that people are like, oh, they know me, they won't hurt me. And, you know, never, ever think that about a wild animal. Your clientele, you know this. But they can get very, very defensive and do things like a jump rake when they have young. So nesting for cranes in the lower 48, and it's a little bit earlier in Florida and the Gulf Coast, but generally they will sit on eggs for 30 days, generally 2 eggs, always in a wetland, with all the exceptions. Very rarely will they be outside of a wetland. And they will be nesting late March through April. If they lose a clutch, they can re-nest. So it's defense of that nest or chicks when they are most grievously offended, and that is when to be careful. So I will say this, a tool of the trade that we use here, our aviculture staff that are professionals with dealing with our captive flock here on site. A broom is your friend. That will give them something to aim for, but it also gives you something to shove back with. Simple as that. So
yeah,
that's a good trick.
Be sure to get permission from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service before you do some of this stuff, folks. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act is not something you want to play around with.
Yes, harassment. So yeah, we can talk about that at the end too. There's lots of
definitely
caveats.
Just throwing that out there so that before anyone says, "Oh, I'll just use a broom," no, you want to make sure all your dots are in the line. But that's a good good technique. So they mate, they pair for a year, a life.
So they are monogamous. Mostly. So they mate for life.
A few stray.
But yes, so we have been here at the Crane Foundation, we have a long-term study area where we have been marking birds in a small little area not too far from here in the wilds of Wisconsin's agricultural heartland. And so by marking territorial pairs and then their offspring year after year, we can get longevity, territory size, productivity, dispersal of the young, and divorce. So we can document that pair that had that territory, well, now there's a new bird there that's not marked, but we still see that other bird that we knew was that mate someplace else. So it either left, got kicked out, the male or the female. So it's one of those kind of, they won't answer our questions, so it's
right. No fault divorce. So it's
exactly
no fault.
But
divorce.
It does happen. They do better than people. We've documented about 5% divorce rate, and this is over 20 years worth of data.
Wow.
So they are long-lived. We document cranes that are over 30 years old that are marked. Their time of greatest risk, like most animals, is that first year of life, and they're migratory birds. So, you know, if a chick can live to being flighted, so once it hatches in April or May, a chick will take about 70 to 80 days to be fully flighted.
Okay.
And so then survivability goes way up. And if it follows its parents on migration, they tend to stay together as a family unit through migration, wintering, and then back.
Okay.
And if it makes it through that migration, then it knows the route, it knows the safe places, it knows how to be a crane. Then it gets unceremoniously kicked out by mom and dad because they're setting up for that next year again, and the cycle continues again.
Would that yearling, I guess we'd call it a yearling, would they find a mate, or do they wait a year to get another year of maturity before they find a mate?
So they don't reach sexual maturity until 3, and they're not even really probably successful parents 4 or 5. But they can pair within their first year. But so also work that we have done with putting telemetry devices on birds from this known area. So we know where their natal area was, where they fledged from. That first year, they're going all over the place. And in each successive year, their home range gets very small.
Okay.
The males tend to come back closer to their natal area. Females tend to be further away, and that's a relative term. It could be just over the rise, or it could be Michigan, where depending on where it finds a bird to follow back. So that is how they kind of separate themselves out and keep that the inbreeding low, so gene dispersal that way.
Sure. Right. Okay. So we have a population of, so let's say someone's dealing with let's deal with Florida, because I think that let's start with something small. So our wildlife control operator or pest control operator gets a phone call. They've got Sandhill cranes destroying the green on the Masters golf course or something, that's like holy ground for some people, right? What is the path forward for that individual dealing with that particular problem?
Yeah, that is tough because they might be digging up grubs or they're looking for food items. When they are digging up turf, that's exactly what they do. They might absolutely ditch a golf course because the level of pesticides probably used on a golf course means that there is nothing there. But
what about worms? Do they eat worms?
They do. Okay. They do. And depending on if they have a chick or not. So in the beginning of the year, if they have young, they're going to be focused on feeding almost exclusively protein. Okay. As opposed to other birds that are looking, they are omnivores. They will eat anything. But famously up here with the crop damage issue, they'll pull the corn out of the ground. But they won't, if they're not going to focus on that if they have a chick, because they want to do protein for that bird. So with cranes, how I see it is the idea is to make it not worth their time to be there. Again, if their territory is nearby, they won't want to leave. And if they have a chick that's flightless, they can't leave. Right. So there's a number of things that you could try in that case. So
act before they have their nest, before they create a nest is the way you need to act.
Correct.
Because once they have flightless young, you're really stuck. You can't really do anything. It would be kind of cruel otherwise, because they can't leave. So they would avoid that. So when they arrive, of course, by the time the person's called, that's going to be too late. So they may just have to put up with it until that chick fledges. Yeah. Which would be in June
July? Or so. Yeah. When they have then more options open up to them.
Right.
Okay. And so there's many things that I have recommended, but I know what doesn't work for cranes just because of how they are.
Sure. Let's go down that list.
Scaring devices tend to not work. Cannons, things you get from the USDA. Okay. Bangers, things that flicker, like ribbons and CDs that have that look. Okay. Again, this is their home, and they will quickly figure out that there's nothing to hurt them. So it has
audible doesn't work, visual doesn't work, not even lasers.
That is something that we're going to test hopefully in the next couple of years.
Okay.
That all right. Might. The level of difficulty there is not knowing if it could potentially hurt their eyesight.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And also in Florida, extra level of difficulty is they're there all year round. Our birds are migratory up here, so that lends a little bit of relief. For homeowners moving, there's a lot of people that love to feed them. It's actually illegal. It's a state law that you cannot feed sandhill cranes
in Florida.
Okay. Yeah. But in general, if people say, well, I'm not feeding the crane, they're just eating out of my bird feeder. It's like, well, that's really encouraging them to be bad.
Everyone's a lawyer.
Yeah, that's stretching it just a tad. But I appreciate that. They are great when they behave. However, so I suggest to people to move the bird feeder if they have, to move it at the far edge of their property, away from, that's when they're destroying like window screens or something like that.
Is there a height? Obviously they're going to feed on anything that spills to the ground, but let's just say they fix that. How high should the feeder be to prevent a crane from getting access to it? How tall would the sandhill crane be?
The Florida sandhills are about 5-ish feet.
Okay.
Graders, the migratory birds might be a little bit bigger, but probably not.
So have the bird feeder at 6 feet?
At least, yeah. Okay. They rarely will eat out of the feeder. It is almost entirely gleaning the stuff that's spilled on the ground. Yeah.
Right. All right. 6 feet, because I have a publication on modifying bird feeders to not feed non-target wildlife. So that'll help on the spillage side of things, because spillage is a problem.
Yep.
Okay. And what else? Anything else that doesn't work? Any repellents that don't work? Dogs? If someone had a dog in their backyard, would that keep a bird away, or would what kind of aggression would occur?
The cranes can recognize people. They might be able to recognize dogs if it's if it's just a Labrador, being a bird dog and all, but he just kind of looks up and be like, you're nothing that I want to chase.
Right.
The cranes will know that that's okay as well.
Okay.
But I have recommended, and this is something that, again, because of harassment issues and Migratory Bird Act, you have to be very, very careful about this. But I wonder sometimes, there are certain things that birds will not acclimate to, and dogs are one. So if you have a well-trained dog, or using like a company that does this, there are now companies out there that will have their trained dogs to scare birds away from airports and things because of collision issues. That is something that it needs to be done over an extended period of time. I don't know how long that is. Nobody's ever reported back to me that it's actually worked. But a dog that is there at random times of the day, it chases at them, but a bird will fly away long before a dog gets to it, I think, unless a bird is injured or sick.
Sure.
It is very, very, very rare that a crane would attack a dog, and this goes back to them if they have a small chick, they can. And they have attacked people
but the dog shouldn't be used during that time anyway. So if you're going to talk about a flock or something where there's no nesting with a clutch, then the dog would have to be used during that particular. But you haven't seen any evidence of a crane attacking a dog. I guess the size of dog would be golden retriever, 50-60 pounds.
I think that would be most
beagle work.
Maybe for the barking.
Okay.
I think that anything this goes back to coyote. That is that is something that they recognize as a predator threat.
Yeah.
And so something that looks like that. And so again, this is something that I've never tested, but knowing cranes, this is something that would work. If you walk a dog in the vicinity, bark at them, and that crane sees that dog there at different times of the day over many days, they're just going to say, you know what, I don't want to be in this place.
Okay. And how when we're dealing with these types of birds and what about how much predation occurs with raccoons?
Only eggs on the nest, mostly. So the predator changes with the life stage.
All right.
Healthy adult sandhill cranes don't have much to worry about. Disease, collision, say with the power line, guy wires, or getting hit by cars. And again, that's a function of them being able to adapt to our landscape and our presence on it. When they're nesting, they can be vulnerable if something sneaks up on it. But a coyote would have a really hard time with, even still, if they're on the nest. A coyote wouldn't probably try that.
Okay.
But if one lured an adult away from the nest, another could come in. But raccoons, skunk, otter, that kind of size mesopredator could take eggs, and small chicks, so just hatched to a couple of weeks. Okay. And as the crane chick grows, the number of predator, that predator suite is going to change, and it's mostly coyote. Something bigger. Eagles could take a sandhill crane chick. I do believe that they probably do around here.
Okay.
Probably not the adults.
All right.
But we've seen that here, and I'm sure that there was famously when there was a non-migratory population of whooping cranes in Central Florida, there was an eagle that got in a tussle with an adult whooping crane, and they both went to the hospital.
Ooh.
But the crane won.
The crane won.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a big mistake that
well, maybe it just was feeling its oats and made a mistake. What about a golden eagle? Golden eagle, a little bit bigger bird than a bald eagle.
But their prey base is so mammal centric that maybe would take a sandhill, I think, but nothing that we've documented.
Hi everyone, I'm breaking in here because this is the end of part 1 of my interview with Lacy, who is the North American Director for Cranes for the International Crane Foundation. So stay tuned. The next episode we'll have part 2 for you, where we're going to get into the damage that cranes do and some control methods that she's suggesting, as well as some resources available for you that are available at no cost to you to download other than your time and internet connection to help you understand crane behavior. They have both the wonky version, which is a much thicker book, as well as a 14-page abstract that gives you the fundamentals of control for cranes. So definitely move on and finish the rest of my interview with Lacy. I think you'll enjoy having that information available, because you never know when you might be encountering a crane issue. And then lastly, do take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to our channel. If you don't like dealing with YouTube, visit me over on Rumble, where I have these podcasts posted as well. You can also reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you, your thoughts, suggestions for new shows. And then, of course, join us on Facebook with the Pest Geek Podcast family. So you've been listening to Living the Wildlife as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. So we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, and make sure you check out part 2 of my interview. Bye-bye.